me ask you if you are seeing just a single slide or kind of the presenter's view, just the single slide? Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. I feel like we've really, just by the nature of the conversation today, started to explore some of the things that I was hoping to hear from you and explore with you today. So I feel like we've been set up really, really nicely. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Erin Hagar. I'm a senior instructional designer with the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning. I've been at UMB since 2016, but I've worked in centers for teaching and learning since the year 2000. So that's kind of what I want to share with you is a little bit how my perspective on this topic has changed. And so what I'm calling this session today is From Strategies to Engagement, Active Learning in Online Classrooms. And I just want to set the stage that my thinking behind this presentation was really grappling with that asynchronous online environment. And I know because of COVID and because of some of the way your programs may be set up, you may be teaching online, but you're having a live session, a synchronous session. And you know, that's kind of a different animal. And some of the strategies, you know, or it's a little bit in some ways more like an in-person course in some ways than a course that's delivered entirely through a learning management system like Blackboard. But we can talk a little bit about some of those differences. But the idea really of engagement is universal. So just to ground us a little bit in some quick history and definitions, as you can see here from this quote from John Dewey in 1915, it's been understood for a long time that learning isn't a passive experience. It's not that our brains are buckets to fill up. And while this has been known for a long time among educational researchers, it really wasn't until about the 80s and 90s that these ideas around active learning, that this discussion about student engagement and active learning took root in higher education specifically. And so this quote here from Chickering and Gamson, this comes from a report that they put out called the 7 Principles for Good Practice in Undergraduate Education. And what was happening was there were a lot of reports and commissions and groups who were formed to really look under the hood of what was happening in undergraduate education and asking the question, you know, is the way that we've been doing things bringing value to the students? Are they getting a learning experience that is really meaningful and impactful based on the ways that we're teaching? And so there's a lot of introspection, a lot of research and exploration of this idea of active learning really started in earnest during this time. And so now we have that many years worth of research and understanding about the importance of engaging students in their own learning, which is something that you all just, you know, knew intuitively just from the discussion that we just had. And so here's just a great quote. I love this. It's so simple when we're talking about active learning. It's instructional strategies involving students in doing things and thinking about what they're doing, right? Like it really doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. So just to give you a sense kind of my history in this space. So my teaching experience is in foreign language. So I was a Spanish instructor for a few years. After I got my master's degree at American University, I was hired as a lecturer. So I had some training in the pedagogy of teaching foreign language. But what's interesting, you know, this would have been in the late 90s as well, is that teaching language is inherently an active learning process, right? The speaking, listening, reading, writing is the point of the instruction that we're doing. They're not vehicles to demonstrate understanding of some other concepts. So the ways that we approach language teaching and the strategies I was doing in my classroom, I just kind of assumed were universally adopted. So when I left that position and I joined a Center for Teaching and Learning at a community college, I was very quickly introduced to faculty from all different disciplines. And it was a really fun challenge for me to try to think about, well, how do you think about active learning in a context where that activity is not necessarily the point? It is a means to an end to engage students in their own learning, but they're not looking necessarily for that engagement as evidence of that learning, if that makes sense. So what ended up happening during that time is that a lot of the responses to their questions became what I call very strategy focused. And if you Google active learning, even today, you'll see a lot with the words strategy involved. So, you'll see things like here are, 10 strategies that you can adopt for active learning. And, you'll see things described like a think, pair, share activity, or having students draw a concept map, or writing minute papers. And you can find all of these online, including on our own website, because they're very good strategies. Like it's a very good resource to have this collection, this toolbox of techniques that you can incorporate into your educational methods. That said, there's something that became a little bit unsatisfying about that approach to me, especially starting to think about learning in asynchronous environments where we're not necessarily all together in the same room, and I'm not necessarily trying to break up a lecture and provide a change of pace. The nature of online learning is very different in an asynchronous format. And the analogy that I came up with, the metaphor, because I love food analogies, is that thinking about strategies only is a little bit like thinking about individual ingredients instead of the entire meal. And so for me, I think that a more helpful framework than thinking about strategies only is to think about this idea of engagement, making sure that students have opportunities within a learning cycle, however long that might last. You may call your learning cycles a unit, a module, whatever that might be, but making sure that students have the opportunity to be involved in their own experience of learning. And this is really important in asynchronous online classes, again, because we are doing everything in this distributed space and time model, right? We call it the weird space-time continuum. Your class starts and goes for a week. A module might be stretched out over a week. Things are happening on, students may post on some days and not others. You may take a couple of days before you catch up on the discussion board. We have this stretched out model. So making sure that within that unit of time, again, module, unit, however you're calling it, students have the opportunity to engage. So let me just talk a little bit about what I mean by that. And we're going to go back to our food metaphors. So if we think about the essential elements of cooking, right? There's this wonderful book and the author describes the essential elements of deliciousness, basically, as coming down to these four principles, right? Salt, fat, acid, heat. So once you have these underlying elements in a dish, the combination of ingredients and the techniques that you use really can expand our thinking about how we're approaching these meals, right? So just like salt, fat, acid, heat, one way we might think about the essential elements of engagement are these ideas of practice, collaboration, feedback, and reflection, right? And if you have those four elements incorporated in some way during an educational cycle, you can be reasonably assured that your students are going to be engaged with that process. So when we're thinking about engagement, it's also important to remember that it can happen across several domains, right? Our little girl here is our student here, and she can engage with her instructor. She can engage with the content itself, and she can engage with her classmates. So we can think about the domains of engagement and think about those elements of engagement as happening across all three of these domains as appropriate. So feedback can be given obviously from the instructor. That's such a huge part of your role, but feedback can also be given by peers and to peers. Students can reflect with each other. They can reflect on their experience with the content. They can reflect on their experience in learning the material, which would be kind of a reflection aimed at the instructor. So there are lots of ways to think about engagement. And one of the best ways that I find in asynchronous online courses to plan for engagement is to really think about those assignments. And Neil, you set us up so perfectly with that description of that semester-long collaborative experience that the students are doing. They're working in groups, so they've got that peer engagement. They're working in iterative stages, so they're getting feedback along the way as they produce this bigger product. So that's just such a perfect example of the way that an assignment can be designed from the very beginning to factor in all of those elements of engagement. So what I'd like to do now, I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute, and we were going to do breakout rooms, but I think it's such a collaborative group, and I think the numbers are reasonable. I would just like to hear from you a little bit, if we could pick up on the question Michelle asked earlier about these assignments that you're designing and thinking about, how they can be designed for engagement. So the first thing I would like to hear is, when you're thinking about your discipline and when you're thinking about professionals in your discipline, beyond the obvious content knowledge that we know professionals need to have, what are some skills and behaviors that professionals in your field demonstrate to show engagement with that discipline? So beyond just knowing certain facts or having a theoretical foundation, what do professionals in your field do with this information? And we're so lucky that we work in a professional school, right? This is very different than folks who might teach a cohort of undergraduates in philosophy or sociology. It's a lot easier for us to make those connections for our students. But just thinking kind of what skills and behaviors do professionals demonstrate? Yeah, Andrea.
So I teach a graduate nursing health policy course, and I've given this some thought because I have a new assignment this time, and it's for the students to develop a one-pager leave behind. Because if you were visiting a lawmaker, you would give a presentation and then you would have a one-pager leave behind. So I've got to see how. I told this is my off semester, so I told my small class, they're the beta group, but I just got an idea. When I'm going to have them reflect on the assignment. I'm just going to add that. But the other thing that I have the luxury on is, because I teach those 5 synchronous sessions, I have them present live twice, because they need to, as professional graduate nursing leaders, policy advocates, to be able to present. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so those communication skills, I think, and that's something that's probably, I'll be interested to hear other folks, but recognizing that as professionals, these students are going to be expected to communicate knowledge and information to different audiences, right? So one is that leave behind. So I'm imagining that's short, snappy, to the point, action driven for the lawmaker, and then also maybe a formal presentation that would have maybe a different framework or a different audience in mind. So thinking about those communication skills can maybe springboard you to an assignment that would be inherently engaging, because the students know that these are the things that they're going to have to be doing in the real world. Does anybody else have a thought about their discipline and some skills and behaviors that professionals partake in that we could pass down to our students via an assignment?
Well, like Andrea, I too teach in the nursing profession, and environmental health. We focus on nursing education, practice, policy advocacy, and research. And so I have assignments for each one of those, and they have very practical outcomes, where I make them do a policy advocacy piece, and I have them review an article in the Environmental Health Perspectives, and then a nursing article of similar topic, and then I have them develop a presentation for either fellow nurses in hospitals or my upper level graduate students. I have them develop a presentation for community members on whatever environmental health topic they want, but then they have to actually pretend to deliver it. So I make them have all of the skills that we will need to go out and carry on the environmental health mantra.
Yeah, that's great. Looks like Catherine's unmuted, and then Neil.
I didn't mean to be unmuted.
Oh, gotcha. No pressure.
But I would say that I came in late, I apologize, but from what I've been listening to, I think one of the ways I can improve communications with my students is to get them, I teach an interdisciplinary, a bunch of interdisciplinary seminars. And so the nurse practitioner students, the Masters of Social Work students, and a medical resident are all on a team to work on addiction and opioid dependence treatment. And so they all speak a different language. And so do the professors from each school. So like our IPE leaders from each school had to learn how to communicate with each other. We weren't doing that well either. And there's not necessarily a perfectly common dialect within addictions for all of us to speak understandably to each other. So that's where I see the need for improvement in what I'm working on.
But it sounds, Catherine, just by the very nature of putting these folks together and having that aha moment that my language is not your language with respect to this, but we're all trying to treat this same patient. That to me, it seems like it would be a very powerful and very engaging outcome, because that is exactly what they're going to be up against when they're in practice. Is that accurate?
Right, and they can't leverage the entire system to help a patient if they're just dealing with it from their own, through their own lens, in their own silo, you know, in their own record, with, you know, their own sessions with the patients and stuff like that. I also find it, and I'm not sure, I really did, I was at an addictions conference and missed most of the presentation, but I work with addictions professionals in other countries that they do speak English, like the UK and Australia. But because we all have a different scope of practice and different regulations around alcohol and drug use and nursing practice, we're not speaking the same language either. So we have to take time to sit down together and, oh, well, we call it addiction. Well, we don't like addiction. We prefer dependence. And, you know, until we're all understanding what the other person's actually saying, you know, the message sent is not the message received. And so I should listen more because I missed most of the presentation.
No, this is great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Again, just amplifying that idea that working with students on assignments around communication skills can be a really useful way, if that aligns with your course outcomes, to foster that authentic experience and create that sense of engagement. Neil.
Yeah, so my program is a graduate certificate in scientific and medical entrepreneurship. So like Robin and Andrea, obviously communication and presentation skills are critically important for those professionals. So I won't mention that. But the other thing that I think is super important is the ability to quickly form and execute within really diverse teams. That's a critical skill that those professionals have to have and demonstrate. So I think that some of that is embedded in the coursework that we've built.
Yeah. Can you give can you describe an assignment that where those skills are coming into play, where the students are practicing those?
I think the semester-long project is the perfect way to do that, right? So I think that's where the teams are diverse, the students don't know one another, but they have, the semester is only 8 weeks long. So it's all about speed and execution and delivering a product at the end of the 8 weeks. Okay.
That's great. And they're getting feedback along the way from each other and
other and the instructor. Yep.
So you can hear those essential elements of engagement coming through, right? With the collaboration, the feedback, I'm sure there's some reflection in there in some of these activities we're describing, where we're not just thrown into this experience, but we're also invited to say, like, how did that work? And why was it that maybe I was put on this interdisciplinary team? You know, what might have been the point, or where was I uncomfortable? And you know, how did I stretch and grow as a result of that? So really hitting all those notes of, you know, feedback, reflection, collaboration, and practice. Great. Anyone else have a idea of an assignment? Or I've got a few from online courses that I've worked on that I just thought I would share. I'll put Michelle on the spot here. Hang on just one second. Let me go back to this. Advance here. There we go. Can you see that slide? Everyone good? Okay, so in a course I worked on with Michelle, this introduction to integrative health and biologic body-based interventions. One of the things she has her students do is to create a personal wellness plan. So each week they're learning about a different category of integrative health. How do you say it, Michelle? Integrative health strategies or approaches?
Yep, that works.
Yeah. And so at the very beginning of the semester, students identify a wellness issue that they themselves are working on or struggling with. And obviously it's couched within all of the language of, this is something you should be willing to share. Please don't feel the need to get too personal. But think of something, you know, maybe you're having issues with insomnia or sleeping, or maybe you're struggling with headaches or drops in your blood sugar throughout the day, whatever it might be, something you're willing to discuss. But then as each week unfolds and they're learning about a different approach in this integrative health universe, they are trying some of those approaches with an eye toward their own personal wellness issue. So it's very applied, it's very practical, it's inherently engaging because they're motivated by their own personal need. And then they are also getting feedback, again, not on their issue or their progress, but just on the application of these methods. So again, we're working within that framework of practicing and feedback, and maybe less collaboration in this one right now, but not everything needs to include collaboration as well. And another course that I worked on, this is for global health. It was decided that it was equally important for the students, in addition to being able to propose global health solutions to particular health challenges around the world, they also needed to evaluate programs that had already been completed. And so they looked for pre-existing program evaluation reports put out by groups like UNICEF or say the World Health Organization, programs that they had finished. And so they read these program analysis documents looking for effectiveness, frameworks, potential biases. So those kinds of skills that you would want to have in mind as you're creating something new, but are also equally important when you are evaluating something that's already been done. Again, these were longitudinal assignments. They took place over many weeks, like the one Neil was describing earlier. And they would be opportunities for feedback along the way, and each week kind of built on the week before the skills that they were learning with respect to this program analysis. And then in an instructional strategies course, same thing, they were working on a 3-day learning experience, integrating all of the strategies and techniques that they had been exposed to. So that's the assignment end of the equation. And I really think that some thought and some care put into the design of your assignments can set your course up to be a very engaging experience, and without having to focus on individual strategies that you might read about that are more applicable to a face-to-face synchronous environment. The other area I think that's really important to dive into is the discussion board. And I just want to tell a quick story because I think about it so often when I'm working with faculty on their designing the discussion board. So in my 20s, I had a friend who invited me to a party. And the party was kind of it was an unusual party. She was celebrating the fact that as an adult, she had been formally adopted by a family friend. So she'd had kind of a rough upbringing. She had chosen as an adult to go through the process of legally being adopted in her 20s by this family. And I raised that because the rationale for the party was already a little bit outside people's comfort zones. You know what to expect at a baby shower, you know what to expect at a birthday party, but no one really quite knew the etiquette or, you know, what to say. So we were kind of coming to celebrate this because it was a momentous thing in her life, but it was a little unsettling. On top of that, when we got to the party, my friend had taken literally every chair in this house and set it up in one enormous circle in the living room. So there was no place to mingle. There was no place. You were either in this enormous circle discussion, which was hard to hear and, you know, kind of awkward because no one knew who to speak next or how to manage that. And you couldn't really turn and have a smaller conversation with the people sitting next to you because that also felt a little awkward and weird. So it was a very self-conscious discussion environment. And I think about that party a lot when I think about how we often approach the discussion boards in asynchronous online classes. I think that when we're thinking about this experience, I think it's important to have sort of two frames of reference. One is that we can use these discussion boards to have formal academic dialogue with each other that conforms to all of the rules of academia, right? Where we're answering a question or we're engaging in a we're trying to reach a consensus, or we're trying to engage with some of these concepts, and we're bringing in resources and we're citing them appropriately, and we're doing kind of all of those academic behaviors. I think that's a very valid use of the discussion board. But the more I work with asynchronous online classes, the more I realize that we also need to have other kinds of discussions that are more organic, where we're facilitating conversations where maybe we're not looking for perfect APA citations or any citations at all. We're really looking for conversation and dialogue, and maybe somebody comes in with just a quick blip, or they drop in an image, and we're seeing something that is more vibrant, but perhaps less along those lines of those academic types of discussions. And I think as we evolve in this space and we get more experience with discussions, I think we need to be a little bit more mindful of, are we creating an environment where we're having this awkward party with a big circle, right? And can we also, if we're doing that, can we also provide some spaces, you know, like Michelle's discussion board example of the book club, right? Can we maybe create some things on the fly? Can we ask them to respond in ways that maybe aren't text-based, right? Maybe they can plop in an image or a quick video, or find a meme that, you know, just something where we can maybe shift the energy a little bit to capitalize on that kind of engagement. And I have a few examples. I'm also going to send around a document. Michelle will do that with some ideas about how to approach this. But I'd really like to hear from you guys. I'm checking on time here. Okay, we got about a couple minutes. Yeah, thank you. Do you guys have any approaches to the asynchronous discussion board that you feel are vibrant and engaging for the students?
Sadly, no.
It's hard. I've been in this work for a long time, and I still default to the post once and reply to 2 people and, you know, let's call it a day, but it's really hard to think of them.
I have a current events in environmental health board or thread, but I mean, sometimes it's hit or miss. Sometimes students use it, sometimes they just gloss over it because it's not an actual assignment.
Right.
I find it difficult to get the students to use it.
Yeah, and that goes exactly to that question that was posed. If it's not graded, if we don't make it a formal part of the course, how do we get them to do it? There is no magic wand that's coming from me on that today, but I think trying and, you know, and I think sometimes just being vulnerable with our students and saying things like, look, I'm really trying to create a different energy here. I'm really trying to find different ways to connect with each of you. This is what I'm trying this time. What do you guys think? Do you have any ideas? You know, just involving them in that metacognition process of, you know, that these structures are set up for their learning and they can also have input in it. You know, maybe could help a little bit. Anyone else have a discussion strategy that's worked well? Well, there are a couple that I've come across either in courses I've worked on or just reading about that I think could be potentially interesting depending on your topic and your objectives. The first one is a role play. So presenting students with a case scenario that they're responding to, but actually giving them roles to play in that case scenario that are different from their own role as student or potential, future health professional, whatever it might be. So maybe give them the role of the mother in the case study or the teacher who is involved in the student's life, and thinking about what those people in those roles might bring to this discussion. So it's asking them to engage in some empathetic behaviors, putting themselves in some other people's shoes, taking on that persona and seeing how the differences in the personas engaging on the discussion board have the potential to create a completely different outcome in the case, depending on how it goes. So, that depending on the context and the content that you're working with, even in like a health policy discussion, maybe you have a local politician, maybe you have a local health expert, maybe a community activist, a business owner who is the one, with a vested interest in maybe keeping the polluting factory open, that kind of thing. And just seeing what happens when they put on those different hats and engage in that way. The second one is called a fishbowl discussion. And I think this is a really interesting technique when you want to draw attention to how a discussion is unfolding and how the levels of persuasion are coming into play. So in this one, you give a prompt, but you only have about 3 or 4 students engaging in the actual discussion itself. So say from Sunday to Tuesday, the discussion is unfolding, but it's only with these 4 students. Everyone else is just watching this discussion unfold. And then the rest of the discussion is actually a discussion about the discussion. So it's kind of a meta reflective exercise where students can identify moments in the discussion where their opinions changed, or moments in the discussion where something they thought they knew, they realized they didn't quite understand as well. So they're using the discussion itself as a vehicle to reflect on their own learning and maybe some misconceptions about their own learning and about the powers of persuasion. So that could be useful, again, depending on the context of your course. And then finally, real quickly, because I do want to leave time for you guys to ask some questions, just making use of guest speakers and interviews in your discussion board, where part of your initial discussion could be compiling a list of questions we want to ask this expert, and then having the expert come in to answer those questions during the module where their expertise is most relevant. So bringing in voices from the outside, but letting the students have some say in where that discussion could go. So boy, we are right at 1 o'clock. That was just by the skin of the teeth there. So does anyone have any questions or comments about some of these ideas? And we certainly offer ourselves at the FCTL for future follow-up. Me, Eric, Becky, we can all brainstorm some of these things with you as you think them out.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was fantastic. I see some comments people are running. So maybe they could email you if they have any extra questions. That might be the best way to do it. That was fantastic. It's really helpful to have a broader picture. I liked your analogy of ingredients or the whole meal. And so that it's not strategies, but it's engagement. I think that was really helpful. So thank you. Brief announcement to the rest of you. Our next meeting will be Friday, December the 3rd. And we'll be talking about online presentation tools. We'll talk about Prezi and about Loom. So if you have any resources between then, just send me a note. I'll send that out to the group. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me today.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.